That night, I arrived early from work, and I was shocked when I saw my son, paralyzed for 20 years, walking like nothing. The old Fiat 147's engine coughed twice before giving up completely, leaving an abrupt silence that always seemed louder to me than the rattling itself. I rested my forehead against the cold vinyl steering wheel, feeling the weight of 12 hours of shift work at the furniture factory like a concrete slab on my shoulders. The smell of glue and noble pine had embedded itself in my clothes, in my skin, in my soul. It was 8:45 p.m. I had left early. The boss, with a rare flash of pity upon seeing my pallor, had told me to go, that the coffee table order for the new hotel could wait until tomorrow. "Go on, Ramon. You look like shit. Go rest." He didn't have to tell me twice. I grabbed my old synthetic leather jacket, already worn at the elbows, and left dragging my feet, feeling each of my 58 years as if they were 80. Now, here in the stillness of my broken-down car, in front of the house that was more an extension of my fatigue, I doubted whether I had the strength even to cross the 10 meters of sidewalk that separated me from the door. The house was a small bungalow with low ceilings and peeling paint that Clara and I bought with dreams that life later took care of tarnishing. The front garden, once her pride, was now a battlefield of weeds and withered memories. The street lamp's light, flickering and anemic, bathed everything in a yellowish and sad tone. Inside, supposedly, would be Joaquin, my son, my Joaquin. Since the accident, 20 years ago, on an afternoon of torrential rain and a too sharp curve on Route 5, my life and his had been divided into a before and after. The before, a 23-year-old young man, athletic, with a smile that could illuminate a football stadium, about to get married, with a future in his father-in-law's logistics company. The after, a wheelchair, a broken promise, a girlfriend who disappeared like morning mist, and irreversible paralysis from the waist down. The doctors were clear, blunt, almost cruel in their certainty. He'll never walk again, Ramon. Complete spinal injury. He has to learn to live with this. And we learned. Or so I thought. I learned to be his legs, his arms, his nurse, his father, his mother. After Clara left, his everything. I learned to lift his inert body, to bathe him, to change the sheets with him still in bed, to listen to his silences that screamed louder than any complaint, to sell everything that had any value to pay for therapies that led nowhere, to beg for extra hours at the factory until my own joints creaked with pain. My world reduced to these four walls and the motionless figure of my son. He was my cross, my reason for being, my deepest pain, and at the same time, the only thread that tied me to earth. I loved him with a ferocity that hurt in my chest. He was all I had left. I sighed, a rough and dry sound in the car's solitude, and finally gathered the energy to open the door. It creaked in protest, like everything in my life. The autumn night was cold, and a gust of icy air hit my face, clearing my drowsiness a bit. I walked along the path of broken tiles, my steps heavy, as if I wore lead boots. I noticed the living room light was on, dim, flickering with the familiar flicker of the floor lamp. I never wanted to fix. Joaquin must be watching television, always the same, lawyer series or strident reality shows that filled the emptiness of his days. I put the key in the lock, but the door gave way before turning it. It wasn't locked. A small pinch of uneasiness. Just an instant. Sometimes I got distracted and left it unlocked. Joaquin couldn't get up to close it. I mentally scolded myself for my carelessness and pushed the wooden door, which opened with its characteristic creak. The warm air from the gas heater, which I had to leave on for him, welcomed me like a tired embrace. The house's smell was a mixture of reheated stew, disinfectant, and that dusty stillness that permeates places where time has stagnated. I left the keys in the blue ceramic plate that Joaquin made in the handicrafts workshop at the rehabilitation center an eternity ago. I hung my jacket on the coat rack, noticing that his coat, the thick wool one he used when I took him out to the garden in the wheelchair, wasn't there. "Joaquin?" I called, my voice hoarse from disuse and fatigue. "I'm here, son. Sorry about the time. Today was a long day." There was no response, only the distant hum of the refrigerator and the low crackling of the heater. Maybe he had fallen asleep in front of the television. It was common. I advanced through the short hallway, my boots echoing on the terracotta tiles. The living room was at the back, the door ajar. Through the crack, I saw the bluish flicker of the screen. "Joaco, I brought those alfajores you like," I said, trying to sound cheerful, forcing a tone that no longer came naturally. When I pushed the living room door open, the first blow of reality, subtle but sharp, reached me. The wheelchair was there, in its usual place, in front of the worn sofa, but it was empty, strangely empty. The checkered blanket that always covered his inert legs lay in a messy pile on the floor, as if it had slipped off him, but he couldn't retrieve it. He couldn't move. My heart gave an uncomfortable lurch, a rapid drumming of alarm. "Uhaku?" My voice sounded higher. My eyes scoured the room, sweeping the empty sofa, the nightstand full of medications, the shelves with photos of when he walked, smiling, in his graduation suit. Nothing. The door leading to his room, on the other side of the hallway, was closed. Maybe he had felt sick and had managed with a superhuman effort I couldn't even imagine to drag himself to bed. The idea filled me with panic. How long had it been since I wasn't here? Had he fallen? Was he hurt, unconscious on the floor? Fear, now tangible and cold, drove me. I spun on my heels and shot out of the living room, crossing the hallway in 2 strides. His room was at the back, on the left. The door was closed. I placed my hand on the knob, cold under my fingers. "Joaquin, are you okay? Answer me, please, son." A sound from inside, a dull noise, like something heavy being dragged, and then laughter, a low murmur, unintelligible. Did he have the bedroom television on? It wasn't the sound of a program. It was different. I turned the knob and opened the door with a bang. And then the world stopped. It faded. It shattered into 1,000 unrecognizable pieces. The room was illuminated only by his bedside reading lamp, projecting a cone of light that cut through the gloom like a knife. And in the center of that cone of light, standing next to the bed, with his back to me, was a man. He was tall, taller than I remembered, very broad-shouldered, with well-defined back muscles that tensed under the thin fabric of a black sports shirt. He wore tight, modern jeans, nothing I would have ever bought him. He was leaning over an open suitcase on the bed, putting things inside with feverish determination. He moved his legs. He moved with the ease and agility of an athlete. He took a small step to one side to reach a pile of folded shirts on the chair, and the movement was so natural, so fluid, so normal, that my brain refused to process it. It wasn't Joaquin. It couldn't be. It was an intruder, a thief, who had entered. And what? Had changed clothes? Was he calmly packing? I opened my mouth to scream, to order him to turn around, to identify himself, but only a guttural sound came out, choked, the echo of drowning. My hand searched blindly for the door frame to support myself, because suddenly the floor was tilting dangerously. The noise must have alerted him. The man stopped dead. His shoulders, those enormous and powerful shoulders, tensed. His back arched slightly, like that of a surprised feline. Slowly, very slowly, he began to turn on his heels. And then I saw his profile, the square jaw, the aquiline nose, that was an exact copy of Clara's, the dark brown hair, slightly tousled, but full, thick, not the fine and brittle hair of someone bedridden for 2 decades. My heart became a fist of ice that beat violently inside my chest. threatening to crack my ribs. My breathing cut off, got stuck in my throat in an agonizing lack of air. My lungs refused to function. He finished turning, and he looked at me. They were his eyes, the same honey-colored eyes he had inherited from me, the same ones I had seen so many times, filled with pain, resignation, infinite sadness. But now there was no trace of that. Now there was a glacial coldness, surprise instantly replaced by rapid, almost mechanical calculation. There was no fear. There was no guilt. There was annoyance. A deep annoyance, as if I were a persistent fly that had interrupted something important. It was Joaquin, my son, my paralyzed son, standing, walking, breathing with the ease of one who had always done so, with a body that wasn't the atrophied and thin body I bathed every day. This body was strong, virile, trained. The silence was absolute, heavy as lead. I could hear the tick-tock of the wall clock in the hallway, each tick an eternity. I could hear the creak of wood under my feet, which trembled uncontrollably. I could hear the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears, a torrent of disbelief and horror. He was the first to break the nightmare spell, not with a scream, not with a sobbing explanation, but with a sigh, a deep, exasperated sigh, like that of an adult tired of a child's tantrum. "Shit, old man," his voice said. But it wasn't the weak, sometimes broken voice I was used to. It was a deep, hoarse voice, full of an authority and strength that were absolutely alien and terrifying to me. "What the hell are you doing here so early?" The words floated in the air between us. Absurd, grotesque. So early? What was I doing in my own house? Was he asking me? My lips moved, trembling, seeking to form a word, any word. Only a weak sound, a whisper of paper drying, managed to escape. "Queen." He frowned, a gesture of impatience. He took a step toward me. 1, 2. The steps were firm, sure, the stride of someone who knows every millimeter of his body and controls it with mastery. He stopped a meter from me, close enough for me to see every detail of his face, the shadow of beard covering his jaw, the cold shine of his eyes. I smelled him. He didn't smell of talcum and medicine. He smelled of sweat, of forest-fresh deodorant, of mint, a smell of life, activity, deceit. "I told you not to come early," he said, and his tone was reproachful, as if I had disobeyed a clear order. "You always arrive at 10. Why not today?" I continued gripping the doorframe, my entire body convulsed by a tremor that came from the deepest part of my bones. My eyes couldn't look away from his legs, from his damn legs, firm, planted on the ground, supporting his weight with obscene ease. "Your legs" was all I could babble. A stupid phrase, insufficient, ridiculous for the monumentality of the betrayal unfolding before me. Joaquin looked down at his own legs, with an expression of almost scientific curiosity, as if he too were seeing them for the first time. Then he looked up at me again, and a small, crooked, cruel smile played on his lips. "Ah, yes, that," he said, with a frivolity that made me recoil as if he had hit me. "Surprise, eh, Dad?" The word "dad" in his mouth sounded like blasphemy. How? The question died on my lips. My mind, clouded by shock, began to awaken, to connect the dots with painful speed. The weekly trips to the rehabilitation center that I no longer accompanied him to because he needed his independence, the intensive therapies that lasted hours, the miraculous but minimal improvements he related to me, always stagnant, just before the big breakthrough, the money that was always missing, that evaporated on expensive medications and private sessions, the wheelchair, always present, the omnipresent symbol of his prison, which now turned out to be the cell in which he had locked me. The truth hit me with the force of a hammer blow. There was no miraculous improvement. There was no recovery. There was a farce, an elaborate, meticulous, ruthless farce of 20 years. 20 years, my entire life, my youth, my health, my marriage, my money, my peace, all sacrificed on the altar of his lie. Why? I managed to spit out, and this time my voice sounded broken, torn by a pain so visceral it doubled me over, forcing me to grab my stomach. My God, Joaquin. Why? He didn't flinch. His expression remained terrifyingly calm, as if he were discussing the weather. He ran a hand through his hair, a vain gesture I had never seen from him. Why? He repeated, as if savoring the word. Are you seriously asking me that? Look at yourself, Ramal. He said my name, not Dad. Look at yourself. You live in this hovel. You work like a dog in a shitty factory. You smell of glue and defeat. Did you think I wanted this? He made a broad gesture with his hand, encompassing the room, the house, my existence. That I was going to condemn myself to live like you, to be a burden, a poor cripple who depends on his old man's charity. Each word was a stab, cold, precise, designed to do maximum damage. But I took care of you? The sentence choked in a sob. I couldn't contain. The tears, hot and salty, began to run down my cheeks, cutting through the dust and fatigue of the day. You are my son. Exactly, he said, raising his voice for the first time, but not with rage, but with perverse and exasperated logic. I'm your son, and a father does whatever it takes for his son, right? That's what you always told me. Joaco, I would do anything for you. Well, you did, and I accepted it. It was a good deal. A deal? I murmured, feeling the world lose all its colors, becoming gray and black like an old photo. You call this a deal? Pretending for 20 years? Stealing my life? I didn't steal anything you weren't willing to give, he replied, with a coldness that froze my blood. And don't call it pretending. Call it survival. While you wore out your back and salary maintaining me, I was able to build myself another life, a real life. Another life? I asked, stunned, my eyes going from his impassive face to the open suitcase, full of clothes I didn't recognize, of objects that weren't from this house. Of course, he said, and now there was a gleam of pride in his eyes, a sick and twisted pride. Did you think I stayed locked up here all day? Please, I have an apartment downtown. I have a business. I have people who respect me. The smile became wider, crueler. I even have a girlfriend, for years, a spectacular woman. She thinks I'm a businessman, that my parents died in an accident when I was a teenager. A shame, isn't it? Each revelation was a new blow, a new earthquake that raised the foundations of my reality. While I killed myself working, he had an apartment. While I ate rice with egg to save on his medications, he had a business. While I cried silently for the tragedy that had ruined his life, he had a girlfriend who didn't even know I existed. The initial pain began to curdle, to transform into something darker, denser, more dangerous. A red and blind rage began to rise up my throat, burning the tears, drying the disbelief. And all this time, I said, my voice now a poisonous thread, trembling with rage. All this time you were lying to me. You saw me arrive destroyed from work and you laughed at me. You asked me for more money for your lies. You used me. Joaquin sighed again, as if the conversation was becoming tedious. He looked at his watch, a steel Rolex that gleamed under the lamplight, a watch that cost more than my car. Look, old man, this is very moving and all, but I have a flight to catch. This farce is over. I thank you for the lodging and the financing. The smile he sketched was the cruelest of all. I'll leave you the wheelchair, in case you miss it. That was the breaking point. The absolute contempt, the total objectification of my love, of my sacrifice. I wasn't his father. I was a resource, a useful provider, whose usefulness had run out. No, I said, straightening up. The tremor in my hands stopped, replaced by an iron tension. You're not going anywhere. Zhou Haiqin looked at me, and for the first time I saw a glimpse of another emotion in his eyes: disdain. Pure and simple disdain. And how are you going to stop me? He said, and took another step toward me, towering over me. He was taller, younger, infinitely stronger. His physical presence was overwhelming. Are you going to cry? Are you going to beg? Save it, Ramon. It's no use. I'll call the police, I threatened, though my voice sounded weak, even to my own ears. I'll tell them, you pretended everything, that it's fraud. He laughed, a short, dry laugh, devoid of any humor. And what evidence are you going to show them? Your word against mine? I have 20 years of medical history, saying I'm a cripple. I have doctors, therapists, all paid with your money, by the way, who corroborate my disability. Who's going to believe you? The bitter old fool, who can't accept that his son miraculously healed and left? Please. He pointed with his head toward the suitcase. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to finish. My taxi to the airport arrives in half an hour. He turned around, giving me his back, as if I no longer existed, as if our conversation had been a mere annoying formality. He returned to concentrating on folding a shirt, with the same meticulousness as before. And I stood there, planted in the doorway of my son's room, seeing his broad and strong back, seeing the suitcase containing the evidence of his parallel life, feeling the bitter taste of absolute betrayal corroding me inside. 20 years, my Clara left, because she couldn't bear the pain, because she told me I was consuming myself in it, and I told her it was my duty, my cross, my lie. The rage, no longer a thread, but a tsunami of darkness, exploded inside me. It was no longer pain. It was no longer disbelief. It was pure, primal, blind fury, a visceral need to stop him, to make him pay, to break that facade of superiority and coldness. My eyes fixed on an object that was on the dresser, next to the door, the heavy marble base of a trophy that Zhou Haiqin won in a track race when he was 18, a memory of the before, of when he was real. I didn't think. I only acted. With a scream that was the materialization of 2 decades of anguish, of sacrifice, of love turned to dung, I lunged toward the dresser. I grabbed the trophy base with both hands, feeling the cold of the marble against my sweaty palms. It was terribly heavy. Zhou Haiqin turned at hearing the scream, his eyes opened for the first time, with something other than disdain or annoyance. It was surprise. Genuine surprise at seeing his old father, hunched and tired, wielding a trophy like a primitive weapon. What the hell? He began to say, but he didn't finish the sentence. With a strength I didn't know I had, that sprouted from the very entrails of my disappointment, I twisted my torso and discharged all the weight of the marble against the mirror of the built-in wardrobe that was next to him. The crash was thunderous. A crystalline and violent crash that resonated in every corner of the house, a cathartic sound, that of a world breaking into 1,000 pieces, 1,000 pieces of glass, each reflecting a fraction of our distorted image, rained on the bed, the floor, on us. Jacquin gave an instinctive jump backward, protecting his face with his arms, a reaction of someone whose body works perfectly. His expression was now one of furious disbelief. "You're crazy, you old shit," he shouted, looking at the mirror fragments scattered like a field of broken diamonds. He was panting, his chest rising and falling with rage. I was also panting, holding the trophy base like a club, my knuckles white from the force with which I gripped it. "You're not leaving," I said, and my voice no longer trembled. It sounded flat, deadly, full of a determination I didn't recognize in myself. "You're not going anywhere until you tell me everything, every damn detail, every lie, every cent you stole from me. We stared at each other through the shower of crystal, father and son, the provider and the parasite, the deceived and the liar. The tension in the room was so thick, it could be cut with a knife. The smell of his cheap cologne, and my factory sweat, mixed with the glass dust floating in the air. He measured the situation. He measured my madness, the tool in my hands, the ferocity in my eyes. And for an instant, I thought he was going to charge at me. He had the age, the strength, the advantage. He could take the trophy away from me and break it on my head without effort. But then, his eyes drifted. They looked over my shoulder toward the hallway. His expression changed. The rage faded, replaced by a quick, almost imperceptible spark of panic, calculation. A shadow crossed the doorway threshold. Ramon? Joaquin? What's happening? What was that terrible noise? The voice was feminine, sweet, full of genuine concern. A voice I hadn't heard in years, but that I would recognize anywhere, in any life. My body went numb. The trophy almost slipped from my numb fingers. Slowly, very slowly, I turned my head toward the door. There, standing, with a light blue coat and a shopping bag in her hand, her face pale and dismayed by the crash, was Clara, my ex-wife, Joaquin's mother, the woman who abandoned this hell 12 years ago because she couldn't bear to see how her family consumed itself. Her eyes, so similar to his, went from my haggard and frantic figure, brandishing a trophy, to Joaquin's, tall, strong, standing in the middle of a field of glass debris, with an open suitcase on the bed. Her gaze toured the scene, trying to decipher it, to find sense in the nightmare she had before her eyes. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The shopping bag slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor with a dull thud, releasing the smell of fresh bread and apples. Her eyes met mine, seeking an explanation, a thread of sanity in the chaos. And then they settled on Joaquin, on his legs, on his erect posture. An understanding, slow, terrible, devastating, began to dawn on her face. The end of the chapter came then, not with a scream, but with a broken whisper, a breath stolen by horror. "My God," Clara murmured, her voice a thread of painful disbelief. "Joaquin, your legs." And she collapsed, fainting right there, on the threshold of the truth that had just destroyed us all. The world was reduced to the sound of a body hitting the floor, a dull, heavy blow that resonated with more force in my chest than the crash of the mirror. Clara lay on the threshold, a heap of blue coat and brown hair streaked with gray. I didn't remember, like a bird fallen from its nest. Her face, pale and stained with tears she hadn't had time to shed yet, was turned toward the ceiling, eyes closed, mouth half open, in a last and silent scream of disbelief. Time, which had fractured minutes before, was completely suspended. For an eternal instant, there was nothing more than 3 labored breaths in the room, mine panting and rough, Joaquin's, which had cut off suddenly, and Clara's, which was barely a ghost whisper. I was the one who broke the spell. The marble trophy escaped from my numb fingers and fell on the carpet with a muffled blow that nonetheless sounded like thunder in the silence. The rage, that blind tsunami that had possessed me, retreated as quickly as it had come, leaving in its wake a devastated beach, an interior landscape of horror and emptiness. My son was standing, my ex-wife lay unconscious on the floor, and I was responsible for this new disaster. "Clara," I managed to articulate, my voice a rough scraping. I took a stumbling step toward her, but my own legs, weak and treacherous, almost failed me. Before I could reach her, a shadow interposed itself. Joaquin, moving with feline speed that still seemed disconcerting to me, crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt beside his mother. His expression had changed. The calculating coldness, the annoyance, had vanished. Now there was genuine urgency, a panic that clouded his eyes. For a fleeting second, I saw the child he had been, scared and needy. "Mom," he said, and his voice, for the first time in 20 years, sounded vulnerable, broken. He touched her face, looked for her pulse in her neck with a clumsiness that betrayed his desperation. "Mom, wake up, please." The scene was surreal. He on his knees, his powerful and healthy body bent over her unconscious figure. I, paralyzed halfway, feeling every cell of my body scream with pain and confusion. The smell of bread from the overturned bag, mixed with the glass dust, and Joaquin's mint aroma, creating a nauseating perfume of normalcy and nightmare. "What did you do to her?" Joaquin turned his head toward me, and in his eyes there was no longer panic, but fierce accusation, instant resentment. "Look at me. What the hell did you do to her?" The injustice of the accusation left me breathless. "Me? Me? It's you, Joaquin. You and your damn farce." The sob broke my voice. She saw you, standing." "Shut up," he roared, lowering his voice to a furious hiss, as if he feared the neighbors might hear, though the house was isolated in its misery. "Shut up already, you crazy old man." He turned again to Clara, shaking her gently by the shoulders. "Mom, listen to me. Wake up, everything's fine. It was an accident." "Nothing is fine," I murmured, slowly sinking until I was sitting on the floor, my back against the doorframe. Strength had completely abandoned me. Only a deep tremor remained, an emptiness that devoured everything. Nothing will ever be fine again. Joaquin shot me a look that could have melted steel, but said nothing. He concentrated on Clara, rubbing her hands, talking to her in a low and urgent murmur I couldn't decipher. He was the concerned son, the protector, the role he had played for years from his wheelchair, but which now, standing with his muscles and stature, was obscenely convincing, and at the same time profoundly false. Minutes that felt like hours passed. The tick-tock of the hallway clock marked the beat of our agony. Finally, a low moan escaped from Clara's lips. Her eyelids fluttered and slowly opened. Confusion was first, then fear. Her eyes met Joaquin's, kneeling in front of her, and opened like saucers. She recoiled instinctively, dragging herself a few centimeters across the floor, away from him. The horror returned to her face, fresh and devastating. "No," she whispered, bringing a trembling hand to her mouth. "No, it's impossible." "Mom, calm down," Joaquin said, his voice soft, honeyed, adopting the calming tone he used when he had pain episodes. "Calm down. You're fine. You fainted. Your legs." Clara couldn't take her eyes off him, as if she were seeing a ghost. "Joaquin, how?" Joaquin breathed deeply. I saw the calculation return to his eyes. The lie machine was starting up again, adjusting to the new variables. It's a miracle, Mom," he said, and his voice sounded trembling, full of carefully measured emotion. "A few months ago, I started to feel tingling. I didn't tell you or you, Dad," he said, shooting me a quick look that was a silent warning, "because I didn't want to give you false hopes. The new therapies." Something clicked. I started to regain sensitivity, slowly, very slowly. Clara looked at him, hypnotized by the lie, her mind struggling to accept an explanation, any explanation, that was preferable to the monstrous truth she intuited. But standing like this, she babbled, her gaze going down to his legs, strong and firm under his jeans. "Today," Joaquin said, with dramatic conviction, "today was the day I felt strong. I grabbed the bed, and I stood up. I couldn't believe it. I was packing things, excited, to go out and find you both, to surprise you, And Dad arrived, saw me, got scared, broke the mirror, and the shock. He paused, letting the story, absurd and full of holes, settle in the air. The shock made you faint. Clara looked at me, seeking confirmation, an anchor in the madness. Her eyes, so beautiful and so tired, were full of a silent plea. Please, Ramon, tell me it's true. Tell me I'm not dreaming. Tell me our son had a miracle. And I remained silent, sitting on the floor, surrounded by broken crystals, looking at the woman I once loved, and the son I had loved too much. I saw the fragile hope in her eyes. I saw the lie hard as a rock in his. I saw my 20 years of life scattered like mirror fragments, reflecting 1,000 distorted images of the three of us. How could I destroy that? How could I be the one to snatch away the miracle from his son, even if it was false? The weight of truth was too great, too cruel. Joaquin knew it. He was playing with that. His gaze challenged me to break Clara's heart a second time, now that she had just received supposed joy. I opened my mouth. The words choked in my throat. I shook my head slowly, a movement not to deny him, but of pure helplessness, of pure desperation. Joaquin took advantage of my silence. It's a shock, I know, he said, taking Clara's hand again. This time, she didn't withdraw it. For me too. I still can't believe it. With a grimace of effort that was pure theater, he stood up. He towered before her, showing himself in all his false glory. Look at me, Mom. I'm fine. I'm cured. Clara looked at him, and a solitary tear escaped from her eye and ran down her temple until it was lost in her hair. A trembling, incredulous smile drew itself on her lips. My God, she murmured again, but this time with a different tone, with a hint of joy. It's incredible. I felt like vomiting. The bitter taste of bile rose up my throat. She believed him, or wanted to believe him so badly that the lie became reality. Joaquin extended his hand to help her up. She accepted it, her thin fingers closing around his, strong and sure. He lifted her easily, as if she weighed nothing. Once standing, Clara swayed slightly, and Joaquin supported her, surrounding her with an arm. She leaned on him, looking at his face, then his legs, then his face again. I need to sit down, she said weakly. Yes, of course. Let's go to the living room. Joaquin guided her gently, avoiding the broken glass. As he passed by me, without looking at me, he whispered with a voice only I could hear, a whisper loaded with ice and triumph. And now shut up. I watched them leave the room, the son supporting the mother, the lie supporting the fragile illusion. I was left alone on the floor, among the remains of what had been my life. The smell of bread reached me, bittersweet and pungent. I leaned over and with a hand that trembled uncontrollably, opened the overturned bag. Inside, there was a country loaf, still warm, a bag of green apples and a jar of quince jam, homemade, the kind I liked. A dry sob shook my body. Clara had come to visit us. After years, she had brought fresh bread and quince jam, maybe to talk, to build a bridge over the years of silence and pain. And instead, she had found this nightmare. With superhuman effort, I stood up. My legs barely responded. I walked like an automaton to the living room. They were on the sofa, Clara sitting, still pale, hugging herself. Joaquin standing in front of her, talking to her in a low voice, telling her more details of his miraculous recovery, inventing dates, sensations, progress, building the lie brick by brick in front of my eyes. I leaned against the doorframe, watching. Clara nodded, drinking every word, clinging to the story like a shipwreck survivor to a plank. From time to time, her eyes drifted toward me, seeking something, perhaps my approval, my corroboration of the happy news. I couldn't give it to her. I could only look at her, with infinite pity, with contained rage that corroded me inside. Joaquin noticed my gaze. He interrupted his story and turned toward me. His expression was now one of feigned concern. "Dad is also in shock," he said, addressing Clara. "When he saw me, he got very scared. He didn't know what to do. That's why he broke the mirror. Right, Dad?" All eyes were on me. Clara looked at me expectantly. Joaquin looked at me with a veiled threat in his honey eyes. I breathed deeply. The air smelled of lies and desperation. Yes, I lied, and the word tasted like ashes in my mouth. It was a very big shock. Clara smiled, a weak but real smile. "It's understandable," she said, and her voice sounded firmer. "My God, it's the miracle we always prayed for." Her gaze turned to Joaquin, filled with a love so pure, so blind, that it split my soul in two. Joaquin smiled at her, a wide and false smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, Mom, I'm walking." At that moment the doorbell rang, strident and intrusive, cutting the tension like a knife. All three of us started. Joaquin paled slightly. "The taxi," he murmured, almost to himself. Clara frowned. "Taxi?" "Yes. I was going out," Joaquin said, quickly regaining his composure. "I was going to your house, Mom, to look for you, to celebrate, to tell you, in person." The bell rang again, more insistent this time. "I'll go," I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. I needed to move, needed to do something, anything, to not scream. I walked down the hallway, feeling their gazes on my back. I opened the door. Outside was the taxi driver, a man with a mustache and cap, impatient. "Joaquin?" he asked, looking me up and down. "Yes." "One moment," I said, and closed the door without letting him say anything more. I returned to the living room. So Joaquin was already standing, ready. "It's for me," he said, with forced calm. "Mom, why don't you stay a while with Dad? I'll go, cancel the taxi, and come back right away. We can have dinner together, talk." Clara smiled, radiant. "Yes, please. What a wonderful idea. I have fresh bread, and I made quince jam." "Perfect," Joaquin said. He approached her and kissed her cheek. Then he headed toward the door. As he passed by me, he squeezed my arm, hard. His fingers were pincers. He leaned toward me and whispered, with a low voice loaded with venom, "Fix this. If you tell her the truth, I swear I'll destroy you. Enjoy dinner." He let go of me and left through the door, slamming it shut behind him. Clara and I were left, alone in the silence of the living room, with Joaquin's ghost and his lie filling every corner. Clara rubbed her arms, though the room was heated by the stove. "It's incredible, isn't it, Ramon?" she said, her voice trembling with emotion. After everything he suffered, at last." She looked at me. Her eyes shone with tears of joy, tears that I had helped fabricate with my silence. And I knew in that instant that I was trapped in my son's web of lies. I had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. My choice was made, to protect her, to spare her a pain that could be mortal. I had become an accomplice. I looked into her eyes, those eyes that still held the memory of a love that was lost between fatigue and sorrow, and forged a smile. It was the hardest smile of my life, a painful spasm that contracted my facial muscles. "Yes, Clara," I said, and every word was a stab in my own soul. "It's a miracle." And while I smiled at her, feeling the weight of betrayal drowning me, I knew the nightmare was just beginning. Joaquin would return, and dinner would be the cruelest and most heartbreaking banquet of my life. The door slammed shut after Joaquin's departure, and the sound resonated in the hallway like the slam of a cell door. Clara and I were immersed in thick silence, only broken by the crackling of the stove and the hum of the refrigerator. Everyday sounds that now sounded obscene, as if the house itself were mocking us. Clara rubbed her arms. A trembling and fragile smile still stuck to her lips. Her eyes, glassy from emotion and shock, looked into emptiness, seeing perhaps the miraculous future that had just been painted for her. "My God, Ramon," she whispered, and her voice was like glass about to break. "Can you believe it? After all this time, it's like a dream." I nodded, forcing my neck muscles to move. The gesture hurt. Every particle of my being screamed, protested against the farce in which I had become actor and accomplice in less than 5 minutes. "Yes," I lied again, and the word tore my throat. "Like a dream." She got up from the sofa, a bit unsteady still, and approached the window, facing the front. She pulled back the worn fabric curtain and looked toward the street, empty, except for Jahaikian's car, that mute reminder of his secret mobility. He left so quickly to cancel the taxi. What a responsible man. Her tone was maternal, full of renewed pride that poisoned me inside. He must be as overwhelmed as we are. Of course, I managed to say, while inside a voice howled, "It's not responsibility, Clara. It's flight. It's calculation." She turned toward me, and for an instant, the smile faded. Her eyes, those eyes that had always known how to read me like an open book, settled on my face. She looked at me truly, beyond the curtain of my false smile. "Ramon, are you okay?" she asked, her voice loaded with genuine concern that split my soul. "You're very pale and trembling." It was a lot of emotion, I babbled, averting my gaze toward the wheelchair, which was still there, in its corner, like an accusing specter, for everyone. Her gaze followed mine. She fixed on the wheelchair. A small frown appeared on her forehead. "It's incredible," she murmured, more to herself than to me, seeing it there, empty, after so much time. "It seems unreal." The air thickened. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This was the moment. The slightest push, and the fragile lie could begin to crack. I could remain silent, play along, and condemn all three of us to a night of torture, disguised as celebration. Or I could— "Clara," I said, and the tone of my voice must have alerted her, because her eyes fixed on mine, intense, searching. "There's something—" The doorbell rang again, strident, implacable. Clara startled. "It must be him. He came back," she said, and the momentary doubt vanished, replaced by expectant joy. But something didn't add up. Jahaikian wouldn't have rung the bell. He had keys, unless he had come with his hands full, or it wasn't him. A cold, worse than the night, seized me. Jahaikian's threat echoed in my ears. Enjoy dinner. Was this part of his game? Had he returned to continue the farce to make sure I complied? Clara headed toward the door, with renewed energy. I followed her, my steps heavy, each beat of my heart a harbinger of disaster. She opened the door with a wide smile, which froze instantly on her lips. It wasn't Jahaikian. At the threshold, illuminated by the flickering porch light, there was a woman, young, perhaps about 35 years old, dressed with casual elegance, an expensive coat, leather boots, straight dark hair perfectly styled. She was beautiful, with a cold and sculpted beauty. In her hands she carried a leather folder, and her brow slightly furrowed, as if she had arrived at the wrong place. Her eyes swept over Clara and me quickly, with an impersonal assessment, before settling behind us, looking for someone else. "Good evening," she said, and her voice was clear, polite, but with a hint of impatience. "Sorry about the hour. I'm looking for Joaquin Vidal." Clara and I looked at each other, bewildered. The name Vidal was Clara's. the one Joaquin had used before the accident. Since then he had always used my surnames. Joaquin, Clara said, recovering her voice. Yes, he's my son. He just left. But he'll be back shortly. Who are you? The woman sketched a small professional smile, but it didn't reach her eyes, which continued scanning the house's interior with barely disguised curiosity. I'm Dr. Valeria Silva, she said, taking a business card from her purse and handing it to Clara. The world gave another turn, slower, more sinister. Partner. Joaquin's word resonated. I have a business. Clara took the card, confused. Partner? I didn't know Joaquin had a business. Her voice sounded small, lost. Dr. Silva arched a perfectly lined eyebrow. Well, I suppose he wanted to give you the surprise when everything was more advanced. Her gaze settled on me again, as if I might have more answers. We're partners in a logistics startup, Silva and Vidal Solutions. In fact, that's why I came. Joaquin had a crucial meeting tonight with some investors. You were meeting at his apartment, but he didn't show up. He doesn't answer his phone, as I had some documents to sign, and it's unusual for him. I got worried. I thought maybe he was indisposed. Her eyes went down to the wheelchair, visible from the entrance, and her expression softened with a hint of professional compassion. Is everything all right? Every word from the woman was a nail in the coffin of Joaquin's lie. His apartment, business meeting, partners, investors. It wasn't the girlfriend. It was something worse. It was living, tangible proof of his other life. A life that was not only real, but successful, and that depended on his presence and his ability to walk. Clara was paralyzed. The card trembled in her hand. Her face had lost all color. The smile had vanished, replaced by deep and growing perplexity. His apartment? She repeated, as if the words made no sense. Dr. Silva nodded, but her gaze had become sharper, more alert. Something in Clara's reaction, in the tense silence filling the hallway, didn't fit. Yes, in Torre Alsina, downtown. He's been living there for several years. She paused, and her eyes narrowed slightly. Ma'am, are you sure your son is coming back? Because he told me, well, he always gave me to understand that his family situation was complicated, that you were no longer around. It was the final blow. Clara took a step back, as if she had been slapped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes, enormous and terrified, met mine. In them, there was no longer joy, no confusion, only horror that grew at breakneck speed. What are you saying? She whispered, her voice broken. Dr. Silva looked from Clara to me, and for the first time, her professional confidence cracked, letting genuine discomfort show through. I'm sorry, maybe I've made a mistake. Maybe there's a misunderstanding. No, I said. The word came out of my mouth before I could stop it. Flat, firm, loaded with devastating certainty. There's no misunderstanding. Clara looked at me, pleading. Ramon, what's happening? I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't carry that alone. The weight was too great. The evidence was there, standing at our door, with a leather folder and a business card. Tell her, I asked the woman, my voice barely a thread of air. Tell her how you met Joaquin, how he is. Dr. Silva showed reluctance, clearly wishing she had never shown up. Tell me, Clara suddenly screamed, with a force that startled both of us. Tears began to flow freely down her cheeks. Please, I need to know. The woman looked at us, trapped. She breathed deeply. I met him at an entrepreneurship seminar 5 years ago, she began. Carefully, he's a very intelligent man, very driven, a visionary. He's a born leader, very respected. She paused and added, almost like an afterthought, looking again at the wheelchair. I was always impressed by his vitality, his energy. I would never have imagined that his disability was so limiting. He always downplayed it, said that with effort and technology he overcame it. Every word was a lash. 5 years, leader, vitality. Clara emitted a choked sound, an animal moan of pain. She doubled over, clutching her stomach. No. Oh God, no. My mom. Dr. Silva stepped forward, alarmed. And his girlfriend? I asked, unable to contain myself, needing to know how deep the abyss went. The woman blinked, surprised. Girlfriend? Joaquin is married, sir, to Carolina, our finance manager. 3 years ago, they have a small daughter, Emma. The silence that followed was absolute, cataclysmic. Married. A daughter. A granddaughter. Clara collapsed. She didn't faint. Simply, her legs gave way, and she sank to the hallway floor, sitting on her heels, like a broken doll. She let out a silent and heartbreaking cry, a sound that came from the deepest part of her being, shaking her entire body. There was no longer disbelief, only the raw, unbearable pain of truth. Dr. Silva looked at the scene, horrified, completely out of place. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have. I'm leaving. She turned around and almost fled down the path, leaving the door open, allowing the night's cold to enter and mix with the glacial horror that filled the house. I knelt in front of Clara, unable to touch her, destroyed by her pain and mine. There was no possible consolation. There were no words. After a long while, her sobs subsided a bit. She lifted her head. Her face was swollen, devastated. She looked at me, and in her eyes there was no longer a trace of the woman who had entered with bread and jam. There was a strange, terrifying clarity. Did you know? She asked, her voice hoarse from crying, but surprisingly serene. I shook my head, tears now falling freely down my face. No, not until an hour ago. He was packing a suitcase. I discovered him. He threatened me. He told me that if I told you anything, he would destroy me. The confession poured out, a torrent of poison that finally found an outlet. She nodded slowly, as if everything fit into a monstrous puzzle. 20 years, she murmured, looking at the wheelchair. 20 years he lied to us. He used our pain, used your love, for this, to play at business, and have another family. Her gaze returned to me, and there was an icy fury in it, a fury I had never seen in her. A granddaughter. Ramon, we have a granddaughter we don't know because her father is a monster. I shuddered. The word monster resonated in the empty house, finding its place. What do we do? I asked, broken, feeling more lost than ever. Clara stood up with iron determination that left me breathless. She dried her tears with the back of her hand, straightened her shoulders. The pain hadn't gone away. It had transformed into something more solid, more dangerous. What are we going to do? She said, and her voice didn't tremble. It sounded like steel. We're going to wait for him. Wait for him? Clara, he said. Let him say whatever he wants, she screamed. And for the first time, fury exploded, filling the hallway with its echo. Let him come. Let him try to destroy us. Let him look me in the face and tell me he has a daughter. Let him explain to me what the hell he needed to pretend this for, if he had another life. She walked to the wheelchair and grabbed it with tremendous force. With a grunt of rage and effort, she pushed it, making it roll squeakingly down the hallway until it crashed against the wall, where it remained twisted, pathetic, like the grotesque symbol it had always been. The lie is over, Ramon, she said, panting, turning toward me. Her eyes shone with a feverish light. It's over. When he comes back, he'll face us. The truth. She headed to the kitchen, grabbed the shopping bag, and put it on the dining table with a dry blow. She took out the bread, the quince jam. Then she went to the cutlery drawer and took out the carving knife, long and sharp. She left it on the table with a final metallic click. And we're going to have dinner, she added, with terrifying calm. Like a family. She sat at the table, with her back straight, staring fixedly at the door, waiting. The scene was surreal. The table set with bread and a knife. The wheelchair turned against the wall like an arrested criminal. And Clara, sitting like a judge waiting for the accused, with dried tears on her cheeks and iron determination in her gaze. I remained standing, trembling, watching the scene, knowing there was no going back. The truth was out, poisoning the air, and Joaquin would return. The wait was eternal. Every minute was agony. Every creak of the house, every headlight of a passing car, made us shudder. Finally, after an hour that felt like an entire night, we heard the sound of an engine approaching and stopping in front of the house. It wasn't the taxi. It was the familiar sound of his car. The door locks turned. Soft, sure. The door opened. Joaquin entered, closing behind him. He took off a leather jacket I had never seen before. He wore a relaxed, almost triumphant smile on his lips. The smile of someone who believes he has won. Well, that was, he began to say, but the sentence died on his lips. His eyes swept the scene. Clara, sitting at the table with a stone face, me standing like a specter, his wheelchair discarded and beaten against the wall. The smile faded. His expression hardened, going from surprise to caution in a microsecond. What happened? He asked, his voice losing its carefree tone. Clara didn't move. She only spoke, and her voice cut the air like the knife she had on the table. How is Emma, Joaquin? She asked. And Carolina, your wife? Joaquin's face completely decomposed. Color left his cheeks. For the first time that night, and perhaps in 20 years, I saw true, genuine, and absolute fear in my son's eyes. The monster had been unmasked. And hell, I knew, had just begun. The silence that followed Clara's question was more eloquent than any scream. It was a heavy silence, loaded with the debris of 20 years of lies, which were now collapsing on Joaquin's shoulders. His mask of security, of calculated contempt, completely cracked, revealing pure panic underneath. It was like watching a cliff collapse, slow, inevitable, and terrifying. What are you saying, Mom? He stuttered. His voice, so sure and deep, just an hour ago, was now a broken thread. His eyes, those honey eyes that could be so cold, roamed the room erratically, refusing to settle on us. On the discarded wheelchair, on the knife on the table, they sought an exit that didn't exist. Don't call me Mom, Clara said. Her voice didn't raise in volume, but every word was a block of ice, carved with mortal precision. You don't have that right. Not after this. After Emma. Hearing his daughter's name, Joaquin paled even more, if possible. He took a step back, as if the name itself were a physical blow. His back hit the closed door. He was cornered. Who told you? His eyes fixed on me. And for the first time, I didn't see hatred or threat. I saw childish, desperate fear. You? Did you tell her, after what I told you? It wasn't him, Clara interrupted, with that glacial calm that terrified me more than any hysteria. It was your partner, Dr. Valeria Silva. She came looking for you, worried because you missed a meeting with some investors. She pronounced the last word with contempt that could have burned. The revelation seemed to deflate him completely. The lie no longer had anywhere to hold on. All the threads of his web had been cut at once. His body, so strong and powerful minutes before, seemed to shrink, to sink. He averted his gaze, unable to bear the weight of our stare. It wasn't for you to find out, he murmured, speaking to the floor. It never had to be like this. How was it supposed to be, Joaquin? I asked, and my voice sounded old, worn, full of pain, so deep it no longer even burned. It was a cold pain, like marble on a tombstone. What was the plan? To continue forever, to let me work until I die to finance your other life, while you had a wife, daughter, business. The word got stuck in my throat. A granddaughter I'll never know. He didn't respond. He clenched his fists. But the gesture lacked strength. It was the reflex act of a cornered child. Why? Clara pleaded, and for an instant, the icy fury broke, letting the torrent of pain behind it escape. Her voice broke. Why? My son, what did we do so wrong for you to do this to us? For you to use our love, your father's love, as a weapon against us? It was the word son that finally broke him. Not said with affection, but with infinite sorrow. Joaquin raised his gaze. His eyes shone with tears he didn't shed. His breathing was labored. Because I didn't want this. He suddenly exploded, and his scream wasn't of rage, but of anguish, of frustration contained for decades. He hit the door with his fist, once, weakly. I didn't want this sad house. I didn't want to smell of defeat. I didn't want to be anyone's burden. Poor Joaquin in his wheelchair. The one who lost everything. He pointed at the wheelchair with a gesture of repulsion. That's not me. I never was. After the accident, everyone looked at me with pity. Even you, especially you. And I couldn't stand it. I wanted them to see me like before. Strong, successful, someone you could have been. I screamed, finally losing my composure. You could have really fought. You could have studied, done something. We would have supported you. I would have supported you. With everything. No, he screamed, looking at me with desperate intensity. You don't understand. It wasn't enough. The wheelchair would always be there. I would always be the disabled man who overcame it. I didn't want to overcome it. I wanted it to never have happened. And this was as close as I could get to that. His confession left us speechless. It wasn't pure evil. It was something more complex, and perhaps more tragic. Wounded vanity, broken pride that had rotted into resentment and wrapped itself in a colossal lie. He had preferred the prison of a cruel fiction to accepting a difficult reality. Clara got up from the table. She walked slowly toward him. She didn't carry the knife. She only carried her pain on her back. And why didn't you leave? She asked, stopping a meter from him. Her voice was now a tired whisper. When you started your other life, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you invent a death? Why continue sucking your father's blood? Why make him live this torture? Joaquin looked at her, and a tear finally escaped and ran down his cheek. He let it fall. Because, he swallowed, ashamed. Because at first I needed the money, then the business grew. I no longer needed it, but it was easier. He was here, always ready to give, and I got used to taking. His gaze met mine, and for the first time, I saw something like shame. And because, if I left, if I disappeared, then I really would be alone. The last piece of the puzzle fit with a painful click. He didn't just use me for money, he used me for company, for the security of knowing that someone, somewhere, would always be there for him, believing in his lie, sustaining his fictional world. He was an emotional parasite, as well as a financial one. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then slowly she shook her head. Not anymore, she said with final sadness. It's over, Joaquin. She turned to me. Ramon. I nodded, stunned, and handed it to her. She took it with steady hands. What are you going to do? Joaquin asked, with a trembling voice. I'm not going to call the police, Clara said, and he seemed relieved for a second, until she added, not yet. First, you're going to sit down. She pointed to the table. What? Sit down, she ordered, and her voice recovered for a second, the tone of authority she had when he was a child and misbehaved. Joaquin, bewildered and defeated, obeyed. He sat at the table, in front of the bread and quince jam. Clara sat in front of him. I sat at the head, forming a perverse triangle. "We're going to have dinner," Clara announced, with surreal calm, like the family we never were. She took the knife. Joaquin tensed, but she didn't look at him. With steady hands, she cut 2 thick slices of bread. She spread one with a generous portion of quince jam, the kind I liked, and handed it to me. "Here, Ramon," she said, and her voice softened for an instant. "You must be hungry." I took the bread. I had no appetite, but I accepted it. It was an act of communion, of survival. Then she spread bread for herself. Finally, she looked at Joaquin. "And you," she said, "don't deserve anything. But eat, because after this, you're leaving." She passed him a piece of plain bread, an act of pure utility, devoid of love. All 3 of us ate in silence. The bread tasted like ashes, the jam like salty tears. The sound of our teeth chewing was the only noise in the house, an absurd and heartbreaking sound. It was the Last Supper, the end of 20 years of lies. There were no screams, no blows, only the sound of 3 broken people, sharing bitter bread under the yellowish light of the kitchen. When we finished, Clara wiped her hands with a napkin. She got up. She went to the bedroom and returned with Joaquin's suitcase. She left it next to the door. "Now," she said, "you leave." Joaquin got up slowly. He no longer looked like a powerful man. He looked like a scared and ashamed child. Where do I go?" he asked, and his voice was that of a stranger. "To your other life," Clara replied without mercy. "To your apartment, to your wife, to your daughter. Let's see if you can live in truth, Joaquin. Let's see if you can stand it." She opened the door. The cold night entered, reminding us there was a world outside. Joaquin looked outside, then at us. For an instant I saw in his eyes the glimmer of something that could have been regret, or maybe just fear of the unknown. "Dad, Mom, I'm sorry," he murmured. Clara didn't respond. She only pointed to the door. He nodded, bowed his head, grabbed the suitcase and crossed the threshold. He walked down the path without looking back. Clara closed the door slowly, with a definitive click. She leaned against the wood, as if her last strength was exhausted. The sound of his car starting and driving away filled the house for a moment, and then faded into the night. Silence returned, a different silence. It no longer weighed. It was an empty, devastated, but clean silence. I approached Clara. I didn't touch her. I just stayed by her side. She turned and collapsed into my arms, not to kiss me or seek romantic consolation. It was the final collapse. It was the weight of 2 decades falling on both of us at once. She sobbed against my shoulder, with pain so deep and heartbreaking that I felt my soul split. I held her, and let my own tears, silent and bitter, fall on her hair. We weren't husband and wife reconnecting. We were 2 survivors of a common shipwreck, clinging to each other on the shore, surrounded by the remains of what had once been their ship. After a long while, the sobs subsided. We separated. Her eyes were swollen, mine too. She looked around, at the empty house, at the wheelchair thrown like junk. "And now?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Clara breathed deeply. She walked to the wheelchair. She ran her hand over the worn leather backrest. "Now," she said, with serene and tragic determination, "tomorrow we call a lawyer and a therapist, and," she paused, looking into my eyes, "and we'll see how to continue from here." I nodded. There was no joy. There was no relief. Only an enormous emptiness and a long road ahead. But it was a real road. For the first time in 20 years, there were no lies between us. She approached, took my hand. a calloused and worn hand from work, and held it between hers, which were thin and cold. "I'm sorry, Ramon," she whispered. "I'm sorry for not being there, for leaving you alone with this." I squeezed her hand gently. "I'm sorry too, for not seeing." We stood like that, standing in the hallway of the house that had been our common prison, holding each other, not as lovers, but as accomplices of the same tragedy, looking toward an uncertain future, but finally, honest. The chapter ended not with a scream, but with shared silence, not with the arrival of the police, but with the departure of the prodigal son toward the life he had chosen, and with the tentative, painful, and moving beginning of a new understanding between two souls who had been shattered by the same lie, and who now, in the desolate truth, found the only possible consolation, not being alone. Epilogue. 6 months later. The morning sun filtered through the clean kitchen windows, casting warm patterns on the old wooden table where Clara and I sat with our coffee. The house looked different now, not because we had changed much physically, but because the oppressive weight of deception no longer pressed down on every corner, every shadow, every silence. Clara had moved back in 3 months ago, not as my wife. That ship had sailed long ago, but as my companion in recovery, my partner in rebuilding something real from the ashes of what had been stolen from us. We were like two veterans of the same war, learning to navigate a world without the enemy that had defined our existence for 20 years. The wheelchair was gone. We had donated it to the rehabilitation center, along with all the medical equipment we no longer needed. In its place, we had put a small bookshelf where Clara kept her gardening magazines, and I kept the novels I was finally learning to read again, now that my evenings weren't consumed by the exhausting theater of caregiving. The factory job was gone too. After 20 years of loyal service, I had finally accepted their early retirement offer. Clara's small pension from her years as a school secretary, combined with my reduced benefits, was enough for our modest needs. For the first time since the accident, I woke up without the weight of dread in my chest, without the countdown timer of another day spent feeding the lie. Clara set down her coffee cup and looked at me across the table. Her hair, now completely gray, was shorter and styled in a way that made her look less like the broken woman who had collapsed in our hallway 6 months ago. There were still lines of pain etched around her eyes, but they shared space now with something that might have been peace. "The lawyer called yesterday," she said quietly. "The divorce papers went through. Carolina's divorce from Joaquin, I mean." I nodded. We had learned bits and pieces of the aftermath through legal channels and the occasional newspaper article about the dissolution of Silva and Vidal Solutions. Dr. Silva, it turned out, had been as deceived as anyone. Joaquin's business acumen was real, but built on the foundation of our stolen money and his stolen time. When the truth came out, the company collapsed within weeks. Carolina, his wife, had filed for divorce immediately upon learning about his deception. She had taken their daughter Emma and moved to her mother's house in another city. The few photos the lawyer had shown us, standard documentation in the custody proceedings, revealed a beautiful little girl with Joaquin's honey-colored eyes and her mother's delicate features. My granddaughter, a child I would probably never meet. "And Joaquin?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Still fighting the custody arrangement. Carolina's lawyer says he's been difficult, erratic." Clara paused, stirring her coffee slowly. "He's been living in a studio apartment near the old business district, working odd jobs." The picture she painted was of a man whose carefully constructed world had imploded completely. No family, no business, no grand deception to maintain, just the stark reality of being a middle-aged man with no real skills beyond manipulation and no relationships built on anything genuine. It should have felt like justice, but mostly it just felt empty. "Do you ever think about calling him?" Clara asked, her voice carefully neutral. I considered the question, as I had many times over the past months. No, I said finally. What would I say? What would be the point? She nodded, understanding. We had both been in therapy separately and together, trying to untangle 20 years of psychological trauma. Dr. Martinez, our counselor, had explained that the hardest part of recovery from long-term deception is learning to trust your own perceptions again. When someone you love has spent 2 decades systematically distorting reality, it leaves you questioning everything. The detective called too, Clara continued. They've decided not to pursue criminal charges. This didn't surprise me. Joaquin's deception, while morally monstrous, operated mostly in legal gray areas. He hadn't technically committed fraud. I had given him the money willingly. He hadn't stolen property. The wheelchair, the medical equipment, all of it had been legitimately purchased for him. His crime was emotional and psychological, not legal. Good, I said, and meant it. I didn't want to spend whatever years I had left sitting in courtrooms, reliving the betrayal over and over again. I just want him to stay away. Clara reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were thin and cold, but they were real. After months of this new honesty between us, her touch no longer carried the weight of history, of failed marriage and broken dreams. It was just one human being, offering comfort to another. Mrs. Rodriguez from down the street stopped by yesterday while you were at physical therapy, she said. She mentioned that her grandson is looking for part-time work, garden maintenance, small repairs, that sort of thing. I smiled. My back, damaged by years of lifting Joaquin's supposedly inert body, was slowly improving with proper treatment and physical therapy. I had started thinking about projects, again small ones, manageable ones, maybe fixing up the front garden that had gone to seed, maybe repainting the kitchen, simple tasks that would make the house feel more like ours and less like the mausoleum of our shared deception. That would be nice, I said. It would be good to have young voices around here again. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. For 20 years, we had thought we were caring for our child. Now in our 60s, we were finally learning what it might feel like to be grandparents, not to Emma, who remained forever beyond our reach, but to the neighborhood children who were beginning to see our house as a safe place to stop for cookies and lemonade, rather than the house of perpetual tragedy it had been for so long. The phone rang, interrupting our quiet morning. Clara rose to answer it, her movements easier than they had been in years. The constant tension that had kept her wound tight as a spring had finally begun to ease. "Hello?" she said, then paused. "Yes, this is Clara Vidal. What? When? I see. No, we don't need. Yes, thank you for calling." She hung up the phone and stood very still for a moment, her back to me. I could see her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. "Clara." She turned around, and her expression was carefully composed, but I could see something working behind her eyes. "That was the hospital," she said quietly. "Joaquin was in an accident, car accident, yesterday evening." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. "Is he?" "He's alive, injured, but stable. Broken leg, some ribs, concussion." She sat back down, heavily. "The nurse said he had our number as his emergency contact. Apparently, he hasn't updated his information." We sat in silence for several minutes, processing this information. After 6 months of successfully building a life without him, Joaquin was suddenly thrust back into our awareness, broken and alone in a hospital bed. "We don't have to go," Clara said finally. "We don't owe him anything." She was right. We had no obligation to the man who had stolen 20 years of our lives, who had used our love as a weapon against us. He had made his choices and built his walls. If he was alone now, it was the bed he had made for himself. But as I sat there, looking at Clara's carefully neutral expression, I realized something had shifted in me over these months of healing. The rage that had consumed me, that terrible night, was gone, replaced by something more complex, not forgiveness. I wasn't sure I would ever be capable of that, but a kind of exhausted pity for the man who had been so terrified of being seen as broken that he had broken everything around him instead. "What do you want to do?" I asked. Clara was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee cup as if it held answers. "I want to see him," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not because he deserves it, not because I forgive him, but because I need to see what's left. I need to know if there's anything of my son still in there, under all the lies." I understood. For 20 years, she had carried the image of her broken boy, the young man who had lost everything in a moment of bad weather and worse luck. Then, in one horrible night, that image had been revealed as pure fiction. But the mother in her needed to know what was real, who was real. "Then we'll go," I said. "Together." She looked at me with surprise. "You don't have to, Ramon. This isn't your burden." "Yes, it is," I said firmly. "He was my son too. For 20 years he was my son. I need to see what's left too." An hour later, we were walking down the sterile hallway of General Hospital, following the blue line on the floor toward the trauma ward. Clara walked beside me, her purse clutched tightly in her hands, her face set in determined lines. We looked, I supposed, like any middle-aged couple visiting a sick relative. The institutional uniforms and antiseptic smell brought back memories of the early days after Joaquin's original accident, when we had walked these same halls full of hope and terror. Room 314 was at the end of the corridor. Through the small window in the door, I could see a figure in the hospital bed, but the angle made it impossible to make out details. Clara hesitated at the threshold. "Ready?" I asked quietly. She nodded, and I opened the door. Joaquin was awake, staring at the ceiling. His left leg was elevated in traction, his torso wrapped in bandages, and his face was a patchwork of bruises and scrapes. But his eyes, those honey-colored eyes I had loved and hated in equal measure, were clear and alert. They tracked to us as we entered, and I saw a complex mixture of emotions cross his battered features: surprise, shame, fear, and something that might have been relief. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse and small. "Dad." Clara approached the bed slowly, as if she were approaching a wild animal that might bolt or attack. She looked down at him for a long moment, taking in his injuries, his diminished state. "Hello, Joaquin," she said evenly. "How are you feeling?" It was such a normal question, the kind a mother asks a sick child, that it seemed almost absurd in the context of everything that had happened between us. But maybe that was the point. Maybe sometimes you have to start with the simple human things before you can address the monsters. "Like I've been hit by a truck," he said, attempting a weak smile that didn't quite work with his swollen face, which, according to the police report, is pretty much what happened. "What were you doing?" I asked, surprising myself by speaking. "I mean, how did it happen?" Joaquin's eyes shifted to me, and for a moment I saw the old wariness there, the calculation, but then it faded, replaced by something that looked like genuine exhaustion. "I was driving too fast," he said simply. "It was raining. I took a corner too sharp." And he gestured weakly at his bandaged body. History repeating itself, I guess. The parallel to his original accident wasn't lost on any of us. 23 years old, rainy weather, a curve taken too fast. But this time, there were no lies, no grand deceptions waiting to be born from the wreckage. Just a middle-aged man paying the price for his recklessness. "The nurse said you had us as your emergency contacts," Clara said, pulling a plastic chair closer to the bed. Joaquin's face colored with embarrassment. Yeah, I kept meaning to change it, but I I didn't have anyone else to put down. The admission hung in the air between us. No wife, no business partner, no friends, just the parents he had betrayed and abandoned, still listed as the people to call when everything went wrong. Clara sat down in the chair, and I remained standing beside her. We made an odd tableau, the broken family, gathered around another broken body, 20 years older, and infinitely more damaged than we had been the first time. "Are you in pain?" Clara asked, and her maternal instincts were clearly warring with her justified anger. "Some," Joaquin admitted. "They've got me on pretty strong medication. Makes everything feel distant." I wondered if that was a mercy. If the pharmaceutical fog was protecting him from the full weight of what he had done, what he had lost, or if it was just making it easier for him to avoid the reckoning he had been running from for months. "The doctors say you'll recover," I said. "Fully, I mean. No permanent damage." Joaquin nodded, then winced, as the movement aggravated some injury. "Yeah, lucky I guess, though I'm not sure what that means anymore." Clara leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" For the first time since we had entered the room, Joaquin looked directly at his mother. His eyes were wet, though whether from pain or emotion I couldn't tell. "I mean, what's the point of recovering if there's nothing to recover to?" His voice broke slightly. "I lost everything, Mom. Carolina won't let me see Emma. The business is gone. I'm living in a studio apartment that smells like cigarettes and despair, working construction when I can get it, which isn't often because I'm 43, and soft and no one trusts me anyway." He paused, breathing hard, as if the confession had physically exhausted him. "And the worst part is, I did it all to myself, all of it. Every single piece of my life that's gone to hell, I destroyed with my own hands." He looked at me. "I threw away the only real love I ever had because I was too proud, too scared, too stupid to accept reality." Clara was very still, her face unreadable. I found myself holding my breath, waiting to see how she would respond to this admission, this apparent recognition of what he had done. "Yes," she said simply, "you did." The stark acknowledgement seemed to hit Joaquin harder than any recrimination might have. He closed his eyes, and a single tear tracked down his bruised cheek. "I know you can't forgive me," he whispered. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to know that I understand now. What I took from you, what I destroyed. I lie awake at night, and I can see your face, Dad, when you came home from those 12-hour shifts, and you were so tired you could barely stand, and I made you lift me and bathe me and feed me because I was too selfish to let you rest. And I remember how you used to talk about retirement, about traveling with Mom, and how you gave all of that up for me, for my lie." He opened his eyes and looked at Clara. "And you, Mom, you left because it was killing you to watch what I was doing to Dad, to our family. But it wasn't really me you were watching get destroyed. It was him, because of me, because I let you think I needed him more than he needed his life." Clara's composure finally cracked. Tears began to fall silently down her cheeks. "And Emma," Joaquin continued, his voice getting stronger, as if confession was giving him energy. "I had a daughter, and instead of being grateful for the miracle of that, instead of learning how to be a real father, I used her as another prop in my fantasy. Carolina loved me, really loved me, and I repaid that by making our entire relationship a lie. Emma will grow up thinking her father is a stranger who abandoned her, because that's essentially what I did." The room fell quiet, except for the soft beeping of medical equipment and the sound of Clara's quiet crying. I stood there, looking down at this broken man who had once been my son, trying to reconcile the person in the bed with the cold, calculating predator who had threatened me 6 months ago. "Why are you telling us this?" I asked finally. "What do you want from us?" Joaquin met my eyes, and for the first time in decades, I saw something I recognized. Not the cruel stranger who had tormented us, but something that reminded me of the young man he had been before the accident, before the lies began. "Nothing," he said. "I don't want anything. I needed to say it. To someone who would understand what it meant. You're the only people who know the whole story, who were there for all of it. You're the only ones who can really understand what I destroyed." Clara wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. When she spoke, her voice was steady again. "What happens now, Joaquin? When you get out of here, what then?" He shrugged, a small gesture that seemed to exhaust him. "I don't know. Try to find work that doesn't require references. I guess. Try to figure out how to be a person instead of a lie. Try to—" He paused. "Try to earn the right to see my daughter again. Though I don't know if that's possible." "Do you think it should be?" I asked. "Do you think you should be allowed near her?" The question was harsh, but I needed to know. I needed to know if his remorse was genuine or just another performance, another manipulation. Joaquin was quiet for a long time, staring at his bandaged hands. "No," he said finally. "Not now. Not the way I am now. Maybe someday if I can prove that I've changed, that I'm not the person who did those things anymore, but right now, she's better off without me, safer without me." Clara stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, I thought she was going to leave, to walk out of the room and never look back. Instead, she stepped closer to the bed. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice tight with control. "And I need you to tell me the truth, not the truth you think I want to hear, not the truth that makes you look better, but the actual truth." Joaquin nodded, wariness creeping back into his expression. "Did you ever love us?" Clara asked. "At all? Even a little? Or were we always just resources to you?" The question hung in the air like a blade. This, I realized, was what she had really come here to find out. Not whether he was sorry, not whether he had learned his lesson, but whether the 20 years of devotion we had given him had meant anything at all to the person receiving it. Joaquin closed his eyes again, and I could see him struggling with the weight of the question. "I loved you," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "I loved you both so much, it scared me. Do you understand? That was part of the problem. I knew how much you loved me, and I knew that if you saw me as broken, as less than what I had been, that love would turn to pity, and I couldn't bear to be pitied by the people whose respect I needed most." He opened his eyes and looked at Clara with devastating directness. "So I turned your love into a weapon against yourselves. I used it to control you, to manipulate you, to keep you trapped in my lie. But it started from love. It started from being so terrified of losing your love that I poisoned it instead." Clara stared down at him for a long moment, processing this answer. "That's not love, Joaquin," she said quietly. "That's selfishness dressed up as love. Real love doesn't use people. Real love doesn't steal 20 years of someone's life to feed its own fears." "I know," he whispered. "I know that now." Clara stepped back from the bed, composing herself. "The doctors say you'll be here for at least 2 weeks, she said, back to practical matters. Do you need anything? Clothes, books, anything?" The offer surprised me. After everything, she was still thinking like a mother. "No," Joaquin said quickly. "No. Thank you, but no. You've done enough. More than enough." Clara nodded. She looked at him for one last moment, memorizing his face perhaps, or saying goodbye to something. "I hope you figure it out, Joaquin," she said. "I hope you find a way to be the person Emma deserves as a father. Not for us, not for yourself, but for her. She deserves better than the legacy you've given her so far." She turned to leave, and I followed her to the door, but something made me stop and look back. Joaquin, I said, and he turned toward me with obvious effort. The wheelchair, the one you used for 20 years. Do you want to know what happened to it? He nodded, though he looked like he dreaded the answer. We donated it to the rehabilitation center. A real patient is using it now. Someone who actually needs it. I paused. I thought you should know that something good came out of all this, even if it was just one small thing. Joaquin's face crumpled, and he began to cry in earnest, for the first time since we had arrived. Deep, silent sobs that shook his whole body and made the machines around his bed chirp in alarm. Clara and I left him there, crying alone in his hospital room, and walked back down the hallway toward the exit. Neither of us spoke until we were in the car. How do you feel? I asked as I started the engine. Clara was quiet for several minutes, staring out the passenger window at the hospital building. Empty, she said finally, but not in a bad way. Like I finally put down something heavy I'd been carrying without realizing it. I understood. For 6 months, we had been healing from Joaquin's betrayal, but part of us had still been frozen in that moment of discovery, still trapped in the immediate aftermath of that terrible night. Seeing him broken and genuinely remorseful, whether that remorse would last or not, had somehow completed the story, allowed us to close the book on what had been and look forward to what might be. Do you think he meant it? I asked. The remorse? I think he meant it in that moment, Clara said carefully. Whether he'll still mean it when he's not medicated and alone and scared, that remains to be seen. We drove home in comfortable silence, past the neighborhoods that had watched our tragedy unfold for 2 decades, past the factory where I had given so many years of my life to fund a lie, past the rehabilitation center where someone else now sat in Joaquin's wheelchair, working toward a real recovery. That evening, as we sat in our clean kitchen eating a simple dinner, Clara raised her wine glass. A small celebration had become our new tradition, marking another day of honest living. To Emma, she said quietly. I raised my own glass. To Emma. We drank to the granddaughter we might never know, but whose existence had somehow made our own survival mean something more. Somewhere out there was a little girl with honey-colored eyes who deserved better than the family history she had inherited, and perhaps if we were very lucky, someday there would be a chance to give her something better, not as the grandparents who had been deceived, but as the people who had learned to build something real from the wreckage of lies. The sun set on our small house, our simple dinner, our complicated healing. Outside, the neighborhood children played in yards that had seen too much sorrow. Their laughter, a reminder that life continues, that hope regenerates, that love, real love, honest love, finds a way to survive even the deepest betrayals. And in room 314 of General Hospital, a broken man lay staring at the ceiling, finally understanding the weight of what he had destroyed, finally beginning the long journey toward becoming someone worthy of his daughter's love. Whether he would complete that journey remained to be seen. Whether we would be there to witness it was yet to be decided. But for now it was enough to know that the lies were over. The truth had been spoken. And somewhere in the world, a little girl named Emma was growing up in honesty, protected from the deceptions that had nearly consumed us all. The story ended, not with reconciliation, but with understanding, not with forgiveness, but with the possibility of it, not with a family reunited, but with broken people, finally able to begin healing from the wounds they had inflicted on each other and themselves. And sometimes, that is the only ending that feels true.